Hi. This week I'm going to give a second part of a two-part drosh, really. And it's entitled, What is the Best Form of Government for God's People?
You gotta turn it on.
Both.
Okay, let's see if we can get it work. Well, I'm picking off where I left off last week. Last week, I spoke on how are we to govern ourselves, and the sub-question underneath was, who would Jesus vote for? But if you weren't here last week, I guess you missed out on that I revealed who Jesus would vote for. So, but actually, what it was kind of a trick question. The answer really was that good news and bad news, depending on how you look at it, that there already was an election, that Jesus already and his Father already decided when he created the universe that he would create us and put us on this earth and give us dominion and control and trust of the world. And so in a sense, we were appointed, we were elected to office. Whether we were running for it or not, the good news or bad news is that we're in office now. We have to do right by God. We have to take care of the world, make sure we do a good job, and then we have to answer to him. So we're in office whether we're elected or not. We were left off last week after quoting from various verses throughout Torah and the Bible, the rest of the Bible. We ended up with asking, what is the best form of government, for the world that we have to run? I mean, we're in this world. How do we govern ourselves? How do we treat the rest of the world? And can the Bible be a guide to us? George Washington noted that government is not reason, it is not eloquence, it is force. Like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearsome master. Government, at least government by man, is ruled by force. That is to say, it's all about control. In a sense, if you look at it, self-government, if we purport to be able to govern ourselves, is really about self-control. If we fail to exercise self-control, we will be controlled. We will be forcibly ruled by others. The Bible and history repeatedly teach us this lesson. So only if we can control ourselves and follow God's commandments, then we have a shot at being able to be free and prosperous and keep control and government to a minimum. We need to talk about sovereignty, or who is the sovereign, that's to say, who reigns, who rules. Because determining who the sovereign is determines what kind of government we have and how we relate to one another. As followers of God's Word, we pretty much know that God is the sovereign ruler of the universe. And as our Lord and Master, Father and King, we owe him everything, including our love, obedience, and allegiance. He's our monarch and our king. And the first and second commandments and many other passages in the Bible, especially the Hafta, drive home this point clearly to us. But even though we know that God is the ultimate sovereign, once again, we don't get to sit back and do nothing. He's put us in office. He's put us in charge. We're in charge. He gave us guidelines, instructions on how to live, commandments. And if we follow those commands, we'll receive his blessings. If we don't, he doesn't really have to curse us. He'll just withhold those blessings. And sure enough, it'll be kind of like the old Midas Muffler ad from years ago. You can pay me now, or you can pay me later. Sooner or later, we get what's coming to us. It's better to follow what God has to say, live out the life he wants us to live, love the Lord with all our heart and soul, and love our fellow man as ourselves. So it's our job to cultivate and care for this world. We've been chosen and elected by God to serve him in his position of trust. So in a sense, we have been given sovereign authority. We're the sovereigns. Subject, of course, to God's sovereignty. But we're the sovereigns. It's kind of an overlapping, concurrent jurisdiction. He's the ultimate sovereign, but really we are the ones, he gave us authority to act in this world. And depending how we act, that's how the world ends up. Now, this is, last week I quoted a lot of verses from the Bible. This week I'm kind of getting earthly. I'm kind of trying to explain how things really have, seem to have panned out throughout history. There are various forms of government. Where there's one sovereign ruler or small group, we have a theocracy. It means God rules. Now, in a sense, we always have and always will have a theocracy. God is the ultimate ruler. But as I said, on this planet, on this earth, there are other forces, including us. We're given day-to-day control of what happens here. If we do a good job, then we're going to have a good planet, a good life. If we don't, bad guys are going to take over and things aren't so good. A monarchy is a rule by one ruler, usually a king or a monarch. And that's been probably the most common type of rule on earth by mankind since history has recorded. But sometimes there's something called an aristocracy where nobles or a privileged caste rule. Plato had a great idea that if we could raise up people for public service that were wise and good, they could be kind of an aristocracy. He called it philosopher kings, and they would run the nation. But they're still a privileged class. Then again, an oligarchy, similar to an aristocracy, means the few rule, ruled by a dominant class or clique. Another type of government, however, which has been very popular recently, is a democracy. That's where the people rule, usually through popular majority and usually via elected representatives. But usually the rights of the individual are subject to the majority, the rule of the majority. Democracies are very, very popular. They're very common. But is this what we need? This is the best form of government. Our founders had a kind of a, they really didn't trust democracies. They saw them as unstable. They usually led to, giving everybody what they wanted, and pretty soon things crumbled, and then that power vacuum was filled with inevitably with some form of tyrannical government. So they chose for our republic, for our national government, kind of the model had been used for quite some time by our colonies and later states, and that is a republic for their form of government. And in the Constitution, the federal government actually guarantees to each of the states that it will guarantee each state maintains a Republican form of government. I mean Republican with a small r, not a big r. It's not about parties. Democracy, though, is not mentioned once in the U.S. Constitution or the Declaration of Independence. This is kind of revealing, I think. And our Pledge of Allegiance, of course, reads, "And to the Republic for which it stands." So maybe we should find out what a republic's all about. The Republican form of government is kind of unique in that it's the only form of government that derives its power from a recognition that the individual citizen, is sovereign. Government powers in a republic are defined and limited by a written constitution, and the majority cannot override the rights of the individual. But once again, the important thing is that a real republic understands that it's the individual, and then collectively, individuals together, they create their own government, not the other way around. However, today, most countries, there's 196 countries in the world, I just looked it up the other day, and virtually every country calls itself a republic or a democratic republic, because that's any country that has some kind of parliament or elected officials elected by the people, where people vote, they consider themselves a republic or a democratic republic. But are they really? Once again, the important thing to understand is God is the ultimate sovereign. He gives us sovereignty, certain rights that are unalienable, certain rights that belong to us. And we then can, if we wish, create our own government. And hopefully give government limited power so we remain free to do what? Do whatever we want, basically, to do good, do evil. But unless we're moral and follow God's plan and God's commandments, we're gonna succumb no matter what form of government we call ourselves. Now there is what I consider the best form of government, and there's other words for it. I call it a divine republic. You can call it a theocratic republic, a republic grounded in God's rules, God's laws. But this type of republic recognizes the biblical principle that sovereignty and the rights of the individual, and therefore all government authority, come from God, and that the people are subject to and bound to follow Him in order to maintain their freedom and prosperity, thereby becoming one nation under God. The government doesn't give us any rights. The so-called constitutional rights that we talk about aren't really constitutional rights at all, in the sense the Constitution doesn't give us these rights. These rights come from God, and the Constitution attempts to draw a line and say, no trespassing here. You government, you, my fellow citizens, can't trample on my rights, and therefore I can't trample on yours. I think history has shown that basically all governments, no matter what they're called, no matter how they're started, all governments instituted by man are tyrannical, either tyrannical or lead to tyranny. Simply because, as we know, present company may be excluded to some extent, we're all imperfect. We always seek power, and power corrupts. Even good, nice people, wonderful people. We send them to Columbia or to Atlanta or, heaven forbid, to Washington, and they either become ineffective, usually, or they become corrupted. It happens. Don't send me to Washington. If I go there, I'll probably become corrupted. But a republic grounded in God's authority, that is a divine republic, is the one form of government that at least stands a chance of succeeding. Since the people, if they do this, if the people embrace God's rule to secure their freedom, that's to say they don't rely on their government leaders to do this, but they, of their own accord, individually, as families, as communities, as states, as nations, if the people, or the overwhelming majority of the people, embrace God's rules, to secure their freedom, then they will secure their freedom, and justice, and prosperity for themselves and their children and grandchildren and the rest of the society. And for that, they don't need to depend on man's government very much at all. To be a little more specific, our founders knew that from history that despite the form of government chosen, the American people, and any people really, could not succeed in governing themselves, which is a relatively modern idea, the fact that people can govern themselves without some kind of oligarchy or king or some priesthood. The fact that people can run their own societies by themselves is kind of ambitious. And our founders knew that without our continuous reliance upon God and His teachings, the Bible, that we couldn't do it. That only a moral, God-fearing people could maintain their liberty and prosperity and also keep their government from becoming tyrannical. It's really been an experiment in these last 240 years or so since we started our constitutional republic to see how long we could last. In fact, history has shown that most nations don't last very long. Even the greatest empires fail. I think we have something, to some degree, that no other nation in the face of the history of the earth has ever had. To a greater degree than any nation I know of. We've been blessed. And why have we been blessed? Because we've attempted, however imperfectly, to honor God, to follow God, to start with our small communities and build ourselves up from the ground up. We had this opportunity on this new continent to do that, and to a large degree we did. We didn't have a huge top-down government running us. Even when the Crown of England was running our colonies, we still had a lot of autonomous and semi-autonomous rule from the ground up, from our local communities, even to our state legislative bodies, which are, nominally under the Crown. A lot of what went on was based on what the people wanted. It's important, I think, as Americans, that we understand our history and our founding documents. We all study the Bible, but I think it's important that we understand, we study the Declaration of Independence, which is just a few pages long. The Constitution, only about 20 pages long. In our Declaration of Independence, Jefferson really said some beautiful things, very important things. And he said that we hold these truths to be self-evident. And I numbered them 1, 2, 3, and 4, but kept the language exactly as he wrote it. We hold these truths to be self-evident. 1, that all men are created equal. 2, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. No problem with that one. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And 4, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Now, to explain that a little bit more, these 4 principles are clearly, firmly rooted in the Bible, grounded in the Bible. For instance, all men are created equal simply means equal justice before the law. Over and over and over again, Moses taught that it was important to treat everyone equally, that judges had to be fair. Heck, when you had a king, if you asked for a king, God didn't recommend it, but if you have one, he's got to write the Torah scroll for himself. He's got to make sure he follows the law and not vary from the left or to the right. The judges always had to be fair. They couldn't favor the rich or the poor. That's equal justice. That's something that's rooted deeply in the Bible. Endowed by our Creator. We are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. Clearly, that's maybe the most important point. And we know this clearly from the Bible. All our rights, no, everything we have, come from God. And we can't forget that. Now, unalienable means, this is something most of us think, well, rights that can't be taken away. That's not the way the word was used. Unalienable, first of all, rights we say can't be taken away. Of course they can be taken away. They're taken away all the time. You say you have a right to life, you can drop dead tomorrow, a heart attack, and what are you going to say to God? I have a right to life? We have certain rights we should assert, but unalienable means we are not allowed, we should not alienate or give away, transfer, sell the rights that God has given us. If you own a car or a piece of property, a house, whatever, some stuff, you can sell it. You don't really own it if you can't sell it or transfer it or give it away. It's your right to do. But the rights that God gives us, the most important rights, life and liberty, we're not supposed to, we should not, we must not give those rights away. Because if we do that, whether we know it or not, it's going to hurt us, but it'll hurt our family, our communities, our children, our grandchildren. We have a duty not to give away, not to alienate those precious things that God has given us, both individually or as societies, or as a nation. And the reason governments are instituted among men is to secure these rights. This is maybe in some ways, the most important point. Why do we have government in the first place? Why? Well, Jefferson said the reason we have government is to secure what? The rights that God has given us. Not to give us everything we want. Let me repeat that. Not to give us everything we want. We can go down that road. Who wants this, who wants that? We become a democracy. The democracy is, well, there are times it doesn't. Democracies always fail because people get what they want. Let people get what they want by doing the right thing, working together voluntarily with one another to help one another. Now, the United States Constitution is considered the world's first modern national constitution. There are earlier ones. Fundamental Orders of Connecticut were 100 and so years before that. There have been many other constitutions. The point is, our Constitution was the first modern constitution of a fairly large nation. And with a total of 7,652 words, including the 27 amendments to date, it's also the shortest constitution in the world. Would you believe it? Ours was the first major constitution that's been followed and copied by many, many nations. Probably as much as half the nations in the world, if not more. And yet everybody else's constitution by now has gone on to tens of thousands of words. Why? Because we sought to create a framework for a government that would simply do what Jefferson said we needed to do. The governments are instituted to secure these rights. So our Constitution was primarily set up to describe what our government could do and not do, and not to go on and on about telling everybody what we're going to do for you. Now, I just want to say this. How many of you all study the Bible? And how many would you say pretty much you've read the Bible at least through once? And I bet you there's some of you have read the Bible in a sense through more than once, maybe 2 or 3 times, right? And probably most of you study the Bible regularly. I don't know about you, but it's not easy to do that. It's 783 words. And my Bible, my NIV Bible, has 1,940 something pages, almost 2,000 pages. It's the 66 books in the Bible, and they're hard to understand. Some are very easy, but some require a lot of study, and study with people that know what they're talking about, and sitting down together with people, and we can really learn from one another. And it's crucial, it's important that we rely on the Bible, we study the Bible. It's probably the most important thing we can study, because it contains the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. But our Constitution is about 100 times shorter than the Constitution. You can read it, it's about maybe 18 or 19 pages long, as opposed to 2,000 pages. I suggest that as citizens of the greatest nation on the face of the planet, however imperfect, a nation which defines its existence in accordance with our Constitution, I suggest strongly that you all out there, sitting out there, consider reading your Constitution, becoming familiar with it, so you understand what it means, you understand what rights it describes, the various powers it grants to our nation and reserves to us, so we'll have a better idea of how we're doing, and how the people that we elect or appoint, or we don't elect or appoint, are treating us. We should know this. We should be wise. We should be discerning. We shouldn't neglect it. In our Constitution, states in one of its clauses that it is the supreme law of the land, that the Constitution and all laws made in pursuance thereof and treaties made under authority are the supreme law of the land. Ultimately, the Constitution is the supreme law. So as good citizens, we're required to follow the law, unless it contradicts God's laws. So shouldn't we educate ourselves and be familiar with the provisions of our supreme law? I mean, we're asked to follow the law all the time, aren't we? Aren't we told all the time, you know, you got to follow, you know, traffic laws, you got to follow tax laws. Oh my God, the tax code is tens of thousands of pages long, growing every year. The Affordable Care Act is I don't know how many pages with how many regulations. We have regulations for managing our land, federal lands that go on and on and on for thousands and thousands of pages. So wouldn't you think we should educate ourselves and study at least a little bit, take a tiny percentage of the time, let's say we study the Bible, or we watch TV, or we study other types of things, and we brush up on our Constitution. How can we be good stewards of our divine republic if we neglect to study the Constitution? As a matter of fact, what I plan to do is, I had a pocket Constitution containing the Declaration of Independence Constitution. They're inexpensive. I'm going to try to get some, bring a bunch in here, maybe by next week or the week after, and you all can pick some up and read them. And I used to carry around all the time, put it in your pocketbook. You never know, you know. Well, officer, wait a minute. You can't do that because, well, I'm not saying you get in an argument with a police officer that pulls you over or something, but it's good to know what our rights are and where all these myriad of laws are coming from and whether they seem to be grounded in the Constitution or not. When I was a kid, I learned to pledge allegiance. In fact, I'm old enough that I remember for the first 4 or 5 years of my education, up until 5th grade, not only did I learn to do the Pledge of Allegiance, but some of you might remember, we also did the Lord's Prayer. Right. Before they determined that was no good, you know. Actually, now I've learned that Lord's Prayer is really not a sectarian, narrow-minded, parochial, religious prayer. It's a prayer of a teacher teaching his followers to thank God. You know, it seems to be about as broad-minded, as broad a prayer as you can possibly have. But nonetheless, we can't, you know, according to court rulings, we're not allowed to say that prayer in school. But we were required to say the Pledge of Allegiance. So I know when I was 6 years old, I remember that I led the pigeons to the flag of the United States of America. I don't know why the pigeons needed to go to the flag, but what the heck, they told me to do it, no problem. That's what I thought when I was 6. I didn't know what allegiance was. I don't know what pledging allegiance was. 6-year-olds don't know that. Some 60-year-olds don't know it. So what is it? What are we pledging allegiance to? It says to the flag. Well, that really means that I pledge allegiance. I pledge loyalty to my nation. Well, shouldn't we? I mean, if I lived in France, or I lived in Libya, or I lived in Bolivia, or Cuba, or Germany, or England, I would, you know, I guess I would want to show my love to my country. But still, I'm not sure why we ask our children to do this when they don't know what they're pledging. But really, what it goes on to say is, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. What? And to the republic. So we're pledging allegiance to the republic for which it stands. That's the heart of it. We're teaching our children to pledge allegiance to a republic, which describes our nation. We don't even know what that republic is. Why? Because a republic is defined in our Constitution. So we grew up pledging allegiance to something we knew nothing about. So really, without a clear understanding of this document, of the Constitution, isn't our pledge meaningless? And more than that, it really doesn't amount to a mockery of a true pledge or promise of allegiance or loyalty. How can it be made to, or why should you pledge allegiance to something you know nothing about? It doesn't make any sense. It's silly. We can rectify that. Maybe we should teach our children, as parents, let alone in our schools. I think as parents, teach them what our republic is all about. Now, once again, the Pledge of Allegiance concludes with the statement, one nation under God, indivisible with liberty and justice for all. Well, with the liberty and justice for all thing we already covered, that's crucial, that's important. We're all about liberty and justice. That's our mission statement from God. We're supposed to run this world and maintain liberty and justice for all. Indivisible simply means, you know, we want to be one nation that's not going to easily split up. But most importantly, I think it's one nation under God. we're not a theocracy in the sense that, people are running around, whether it's ministers or rabbis or priests or whatever, and telling us and running the government. We've never been a theocracy. There's very few in this world. Maybe Iran, Saudi Arabia, a few other nations are really run by the religious leaders. But under God means that we understand, once again, that all our rights come from God, that we need to follow God, that we can't just do it once in a while, we need to do it constantly. This is our mission statement: pursuing liberty and justice, and submitting to and embracing God, both as individuals and as a nation. Once again, I think I made reference earlier to the fact that there's something like 196 nations. I started reading them. I was going to print them out tonight, but I didn't have enough time. But there's all kinds of nations, and they all call themselves republics or democratic republics. And I'm thinking, gosh, I'm laughing because I'm seeing half of these places I wouldn't want to live. The People's Republic of Korea, North Korea, all these kinds of things. But then again, we shouldn't laugh and look down at some of these nations, because we have to look at our own nation as well. We've been so blessed, and yet, how is our nation doing? Are we living up to our promises? Are we living up to our mission statement? I don't know. I think we're failing in many respects. In some ways, we're not. I want to say this. There seems to be about 3 different ways we can look at this. As people of God, we can either keep on going the way we're going, exhort one another to be good, to follow God, be good people. It's very important. Be gentle as doves, as Yeshua said. But he said, be wise as serpents.
Right.
For wise as serpents, we can't just be nice people. Nice people, that's a good start. We have to turn the other cheek. We have to live good, righteous lives, caring, loving lives. But it's sad to say it's not enough. We have to do more. We can do, as some would say, and I've read things online about this, and ministers made these points, and made some very powerful points about this. We need to get out of politics. We should not even vote. Christians shouldn't vote. Have you heard that? Because when you vote, you're just feeding a system that's corrupt. You're voting for the lesser two evils more than likely. And just the fact that you're voting, you're empowering all these people that are nothing but control freaks that want to run your lives. A lot of truth to that. So is that the solution?
No.
We stay away, we don't vote, we have nothing to do with it. Be like the, what was that group in 2,000 years ago, the Yeshua's time? They had nothing to do with the others. They stayed away. They were too pure. How is that going to solve the problem? How is that going to fulfill that office that we're elected to by God, whether we like it or not, and we're in charge? How is running away from the problem going to help us? Does that mean every one of us has to be a political activist, has to run for? Of course not. We all do our part. We have to be aware of what's going on. The third option is to basically say, listen, we have to engage ourselves or re-engage ourselves with all levels of our existence. Political, economic. We have to run for office or back people that we know think are good. We have to decide what laws we think are fair, what laws violate our Constitution or violate our Torah. Do we want to follow? Do we want to follow all laws? Are all laws good? Are all laws constitutional? Are all laws godly? I don't think so. The Roman historian Tacitus says, as I pointed out last week, the more laws a nation has, the more corrupt it is. We have to be discerning. So I'm calling for more activism. It doesn't mean you have to run out and suddenly be, putting up signs and things like that. I mean, voting every couple of years isn't the whole point. It's being cognizant of what's going on, looking at government, thinking, what do I need? What don't we need? Is this right or is this not right? So I want to close with prayer. And I pretty much put it up on the board. If we have sinned against the Lord by not caring for our nation and our world as we should have, and I think to a large degree we have, I'm not talking about the people in this room mostly. I'm talking about how we have we've ceded the field to others. We voted for people, we had no idea whether they were God-fearing, no idea whether they were going to do the right job because they knew they had to because they feared the Lord. We just voted for them because they were the party that we wanted or the lesser two evils. Other things, we've thrown God out of our society to a large degree, but not all of us. Most of us here, we're fighting that battle. We need to do more to see that we can get our fellow citizens to join us and try to recapture the field. We need to have hope that as God assured King Solomon, you know, in 2 Chronicles 7:14, that if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn away from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. Let's hope and pray that He can do that. God will do that, and I believe He will if we do our part. Amen.
Amen.
I think the people of America failed